mentioned mental health in your first I mean, in the opening of your speech.
Yes.
Mental health is a very important issue to me. I lost my best friend from college 5 years ago to suicide by firearm. And he was an upcoming political activist that fell through the cracks, battled schizophrenia. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that policy, what you've done in New York City and what you plan to do nationally?
Absolutely. First of all, I'm very sorry for what you went through. And this is, I think there's hardly a human being who doesn't have a story to tell about someone in their life, in their family, or a friend who's been lost or who has suffered greatly. We, in the last week in our city, we lost a high-ranking police chief and a detective, both for suicide. And it's because we still have so much farther to go in this country to help people talk about mental health, be open about it, not feel it's anything to be ashamed of. Excuse me. My wife Shalane talks about the fact that what we have to have is a national conversation. Because if you told me right now that you had asthma, or you had a broken leg, or you had diabetes, no one's going to think that's a character flaw. But anyone who talks about mental health still has to deal with that stigma. So we need a national concerted effort to take away that stigma. We also need to ensure that what happened in the state of Iowa could never happen again here or anywhere else, where mental health facilities were shut down in communities that desperately needed them, and create a situation where people could not get the health care, even if they were willing to come forward. And so here's this extraordinary fact about our country. We do not have a mental health policy in America. It does not exist. There's no strategy, there's no vision, there's no policy. What Charlene is doing is called Thrive NYC, is to start to build a whole strategy where someone can call one phone number, whether it's depression, anxiety, anything, opioid addiction, anything, and get connected to care right away. And then have the ability to stick with it, get more help. We should have that for the whole country. So, I believe in universal health care too, and I think that's one of the things that will open up the doors to better mental health support as well. But it begins with actually saying that it's unacceptable to not have a mental health strategy, that it can be done. And then in the case of so many good people who didn't know where to turn, if they're hearing all the time that help is there for you, you're not going to be judged. You're just going to be helped. I think we can make a huge difference. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Just speak loud so I can hear you. That was easy.
So, my name is Matthew, and I actually came all the way from New York City, Brooklyn, to come visit this event. With this, I have this really important question. So, I'm a student in New York City, and I go to school and I continue to see my peers being affected by summonses for low-level offenses and misdemeanors when it comes to for example, I have a friend who's going and stopped by a teacher. Maybe he's walking in the halls. Maybe he's not where he's supposed to do, but instead of being addressed by a teacher or a counselor, he's addressed by a police officer. And he's getting into a situation where he might have to be arrested and removed from the school community. So, with that being the case, I heard you have a radio show in New York City, and you mentioned there that there's been a drop when it comes to summonses in New York City. And something that I really feel that needs to be noticed is that there hasn't been a change when it comes to the environment, how many people are affected now when it comes to people of color. When I say that, is that when you look at the data, students who are suspended in New York City school, majority of them look like me. Majority of them are Black and Latinx students. And as someone who's a part of this community, as somebody who does not want to see this happen to anyone in any of the communities, I really would love to hear your stance on eliminating arrests and summonses for low-level offenses and misdemeanors so that we can keep our young people within school.
Anyone who came all the way to answer the question is truly committed to their cause. Let's thank him for that. You want to go show your mom? All right, hey mom. We have been driving down suspensions. We have been driving down the use of arrest. This question is about schools, but I also want to generalize it. When I came into office, there was a very negative, divisive strategy called stop and frisk that was used by the previous administration. It was creating a huge rift between our police and our community. We ended that broken policy. A lot of naysayers said it would make our city less safe. We got rid of stop and frisk. Our city got safer every single year since we got rid of it. And that was about bringing police and community together and respecting people. But here's another fact that is extraordinary. We are using arrest a lot less and getting better and better public safety results. In the city of New York, 2018, we had 150,000 fewer arrests than 5 years earlier, and we got safer. 150,000 fewer arrests, and we got safer. We are using restorative justice approaches in our school, which we fundamentally believe in, which is basically if you have a problem with one or more young people, try to work it through, mediate, have there be a dialogue rather than use punitive means wherever possible. That's been tremendously successful. We're building that out. So we have been driving down arrests, driving down summonses. We have implicit bias training for our police officers, our teachers, which has been very healthy and productive. We still have to keep our schools safe, and I'm committed to that. We have driven down crime in our schools as well. So we're going to strike a balance. I've spoken to this publicly many, many times. But we must have the least, in everything we do, try and find the least invasive approach, the approach that builds dialogue between educators, school safety officers, and our students, our parents. Make us safe, but also increase our ability to have a positive learning environment. I have evidence that that has been happening more and more, and there's a lot more to come. And I don't accept disparity anywhere. We're fighting disparity with everything we're doing. But the good news is there's so many fewer students are getting suspensions or any other kind of punishment because we found other productive ways to address it. Who else? Yes?
I know you've got a lot of problems in the inner city certain areas, and they get a lot of food subsidies from the Farm Bill. Here in Iowa, we found that the inner cities have a lot in common with the farmers.
Yes.
That we have the same kinds of prices. Community Reinvestment Act is one of them. On the other hand, the Democrats here in Iowa, who are the leaders, they have not been very successful at winning the rural vote. You come here and say, I'm coming to Iowa, tell me about Iowa farm politics. You're going to hear from people at the top who lost. And we had two candidates who, last time, only had one county. One of them won, one of them lost. They only won one county in the West, into a Congress. So what do you have for a strategy? Are you listening to farmers? I'd certainly like to have contact with your campaign. But anyway, to say, you can see how your city background can be useful in dealing with rural Iowa.
I thank you for that question, because where you started is powerful. First of all, Americans have so much in common with each other. I do not accept this notion that we're this horribly divided country, because when I spend time around people, I find a whole lot of common interests, common values, desire for dialogue. And I certainly think for rural people in America, rural Iowans, who are facing huge economic challenges, who are worried about whether there's going to be enough money to make ends meet, whether there's going to be enough work, whether their farm's going to be okay, they're worried about whether their school is going to still be there, or whether it's going to consolidate, whether a healthcare facility is going to be there. I mean, this is so resonant with what a lot of folks in urban areas of America worry about all the time. And I think we have tremendous common interests. And I think if we can form a rural-urban coalition, we can transform the politics of this country. And I believe it's there for the taking. On the question of going out and listening to people, was the first day on the campaign trail, I happened to be here in Iowa, and the second stop I made was in Greene County at a farm. And I met with a group of farm activists, family farm activists, who talked about these very same parallels and how we can bridge that gap and actually create that coalition. So in the coming weeks, I'm going to have a lot more to say on the specifics, but I want to tell you, I think this is an amazing opportunity, and I think what a lot of people in rural Iowa and rural America want is for Democrats to actually speak to them, to not bypass them, to not disrespect them, to not treat them like, oh, they're red territory, but to go and actually present a vision of economic change and economic justice. And that's what I intend to do. Thank you very much. Yes?
Hello, so my name's Andrea Cologne, and I came here all the way from Broadway, New York City also.
This is good, we got some travelers.
Last year in high school, I saw my peers arrested for fighting in the hallway. It was traumatizing to see them be arrested as a young person. And young people are still learning how to navigate life and making mistakes. But I have never seen a white young person in my school get arrested for fighting. So clearly there's a disparity there, as even though suspensions, arrests, summonses continue to go down, the disparity is still there. So arresting and giving a student a criminal summons for fighting is not about safety. It really just feels like it's there to remind us that they have power to put us in a cage. So we are here again to ask you, will you issue an official policy to end arrests and summons for misdemeanors and low-level infractions in New York City schools, because this is an issue of racial justice at this time?
So I've talked this before. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Look, we are now the safest big city in America. Our school system has gotten consistently safer. And you said something, I thank you for being objective and saying arrests are down, summonses are down, suspensions are down, and we're going to continue to drive them down while keeping us safe. And we're going to fight disparity every way. I have not been in favor of a blanket policy that bans the use of arrests and summons, because there are some circumstances where it's needed, but the idea is to use it as infrequently as possible and as fairly as possible. And I think the results are speaking for themselves in terms of safety. We've got a lot to do to make sure we end disparity. And I want everyone, our school safety officers, our educators, our police officers, everyone to understand how to treat people fairly. And that's what we're building towards. But if you're talking about safety and you're talking about progress and getting rid of a lot of unnecessarily punitive approaches and really focusing on restorative justice, that is exactly what we're doing. Please.
Going back to the rural issues, Trump, when he came through Iowa, talked a lot about supporting the RFS, but then got in office and started gutting the renewable fuel standard. If you become president, what would you do to strengthen the renewable fuel standard?
Look, I think I have a simple starting point in this discussion, which is the biggest danger, the existential threat, is global warming. Global warming is about fossil fuels. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm just sending my way to it.
Yeah.
Global warming is about fossil fuels. I want to tell you, and I'm proud of this fact, that we have divested, in New York, we have divested from fossil fuel companies. Big time. And I say, since I represent 8.6 million people, when we divest, it's a lot of money. We've taken $5 billion away from the big oil companies. We are suing them on top of that because what happened to us with Hurricane Sandy and what's happened in this state with the horrible flooding and all over the country is directly a result of policies of those oil companies. And they knew they were fostering climate change and global warming. They didn't want to talk about it. They kept the same approaches. We believe they did something illegal and we're fighting them in court on that. But what I want to see is get away from fossil fuels. I want to protect the people who do the work, because I care about working people first. So as we move away from fossil fuels, I do not want to make the mistakes that we've heard in the past of people saying, oh, you know, we're going to get rid of fossil fuels, but don't think about the working people. We need to make sure there is a job for those working people at the same time as we're making that transformation, and I believe we can. But one of the things that we will do as we move away from fossil fuels is figure out the right amount of biofuels and figure out, of course, how to reach deep as possible into renewables, wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, etc. So yes, I think the current approach on renewable fuel standard is a mistake. I think we need to amend it to make it easier to use biofuels appropriately. But we got to figure out is, what is that balance point? Maximize the use of renewables, because that's the single best option. And then figure out what the mix is otherwise, but it should be predicated on the notion of the least possible use of fossil fuels going forward.
Yes, sir. To follow up on that issue, renewable fuels contributes to the pollution of our waterways and our land. And I wonder, you know, the corn that we grow, what of it that doesn't get exported is used to make ethanol, and the rest of it is used to feed pigs. And our rivers just run full of nitrates and phosphates because of the way we farm corn, and also because of the way we farm pigs. And I wonder, how are you going to strike, if there's a balance to be struck, how are you going to strike it, but what are you going to do to help us clean up our waterways and our air?
So this to me is a very powerful issue, and I'm getting educated by people I talk to all over Iowa, and I'll have more formal positions as I go along in the coming weeks. But to the core question, you said it right. How are we going to strike that balance? Look, climate change is an existential threat. So that means there's a certain amount of biofuel we need. But on the other hand, we have to be extremely careful about environmental degradation beyond the question of climate change. And it's clear that something is wrong in a lot of our farming communities in terms of what's been done, the kind of impact of not having enough biodiversity. And we have to figure out what government policies will support family farmers, address what I think is the over-corporatization of the farm sector and reduce it, and support biodiversity, and figuring out what the right place is for biofuels. That is the balance that has to be struck. It's my responsibility to bring you my vision in specific. But since you're asking today, that's the broad formula I'm trying to work through. Job one, get away from fossil fuels. Still protect working people, but get away from fossil fuels. Figure out what that balance is, and take the actions to start to improve the conservation, improve the environment of farming communities. But let's be clear, that only will happen with a strong federal role. Because if we continue to have a highly corporatized farm sector, there won't be any environmentalism, there won't be any addressing climate change. The federal government's going to have to step in a very aggressive way and change the rules of the game.
Hello, Mayor. One of my top issues is climate change. I saw in your literature it says that there's a fuel city that's its own green new deal. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes.
See the country as far as combating climate change.
Yeah, I think the Green New Deal is the right direction. And I liked it so much, I said, let's just do it. Again, one of the beautiful things about being a chief executive is you get to actually take action. And it was time for much more aggressive action. It began with making sure we were not contributing to the problem. That's why we divested from the fossil fuel companies. That's why we sued them. But we also decided that we needed to be very aggressive in purchasing renewable power. So our own city government, I'll give you just the size of our city government is pretty astounding. I have a $92 billion operating budget. I have 380,000 or so employees. Our city government uses, in a typical day, as much power as used by everyone in the state of Vermont. To give you a scale, our city government will be running on all renewable electricity in the next 5 years. That's a mandate that we have made. We are not only converting our city car fleet to all electric vehicles, but we're putting up electric charging stations, publicly funded, publicly installed all over the city for everyday people to use. So that it'll be much more easy to get an electric vehicle and make it viable. And we think it'll really contribute to the growth of the electric vehicle market that biggest city countries doing that. We're building that infrastructure. I think you might agree the federal government should be doing that everywhere. But since they're not, we're doing it. And then, very importantly, we said we are not going to allow the same old reality with our buildings. And if you look around this country, we all think about cars, rightfully. But one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions is buildings, particularly large buildings in urban areas. We turned to the real estate community and said, we got to do something about this. I spoke at the UN actually a few years ago and said, either we're going to come up with a voluntary approach or we will mandate it. You won't be shocked to know the real estate community did not agree to a voluntary approach to retrofit all their buildings. So we have now put the toughest mandates on earth, not just in America, on earth, on the real estate industry, on the building owners. They must retrofit their buildings. They must become clean and green. If they don't, for the largest buildings, the annual fines will be $1 million or more. So we put teeth into it. Because in the end, we have to recognize this is what the Green New Deal is all about, that 12-year time frame the UN is talking about. We must make very intensive change quickly. Whether it's about the cars we drive, what our government uses for energy, how we deal with the fossil fuel industry, what our buildings are built like. We also said we're not going to allow those big, fancy glass and steel skyscrapers that are incredibly energy inefficient. We're literally not going to allow them. If anyone wants to buy that, build that kind of building, they have to have very stringent new rules on energy use. This is what government needs to do if we're going to survive this. So we're doing all that right this minute in New York City, and we're going to be doing a lot more. Please.
I have a question about education, but I met this young woman this morning, and she's also from New York City, and I thought since she traveled so far that I would do...
Why don't you do yours, and we'll get to hers after. We're not going to forget it. You can go ahead with yours.
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns about Betsy DeVos being the head of our education.
You're not alone.
I'd like to know how we're going to address all of the issues that having somebody that works for for-profit schools, the charter schools, and get that out of our education system and restore to an education system that is truly run for instead of for-profit.
So you know people by their friends, and you know people by their enemies. When I took office, my predecessor, Michael Bloomberg, had been very, very pro-charter school, and didn't matter what the charter school was doing, didn't matter if it was a privatization of our schools. And I said, no, I believe in traditional public schools. I believe that's the future of this country. And we work with charter schools that take all children, including special needs kids and English language learners and kids who don't test well. But there are certain charter schools that don't do those things. And I said very clearly, new rules. Literally a bunch of hedge fund backers in charter schools did about $5 million of advertising against me in the first few months that I was mayor to try and stop me. And I told them I didn't care. We were going to make a change, and we have. And now, I'm proud to say, as we doubled down on traditional public schools, guess what's happened? We have the highest graduation rate in the history of New York City. I'm very proud of that fact. We have the highest number of kids going on to higher education we've ever had, the lowest dropout rate. We have pre-K for all our children. We have advanced placement courses in every high school, regardless of zip code, regardless of income. All high schools have advanced placement courses now. And we did that by doubling down on traditional public schools. So Betsy DeVos is a danger to our nation and our future. The good news is, boy, she does not do a good job of hiding it. So I think people have figured it out. But I think the Republicans found out the hard way that in so much of America, the only game in town is the traditional public school, and people love their public schools. And I think we have a chance to build a new national consensus around public education. But you know what it's going to take is an actual vision. I'm a public school kid myself. Both my kids went to public schools. When I became mayor, I was the first mayor in New York City history to serve as mayor while having kids in public school. I am going to have a vision for the future of American public education that points out to people in this country that we won't make it without that. And it begins with what we're doing in New York. Pre-K for free for every child, and the next thing we're doing, every 3-year-old should get full-day early child education for free. That should be a national policy funded by our federal government. I intend to do that. Okay, let's get her. She's tag teaming here.
Okay, so...
And then I'm going to say, you're going to get yours, but the last two after this will be Iowans, just to give the folks who came here from here a chance. Go ahead.
Eric Garner was killed in your first year as mayor, and 5 years later, 0 officers were disciplined or even fired. Villains interveners are killing after he's being chokehold, said 11 times that he couldn't breathe, falsifying charges after he was dead and misconduct. Your claims that officers could be fired because of ongoing investigations have proven to be lies multiple times. Wayne Isaac, the officer who killed Delron Small, was prosecuted for murder, but hasn't had any discipline. Your actions obstructing and delaying firing these officers make it seem like you don't care about officers killing Black lives.
That's obviously false with all due respect.
When will your administration fire Randy Pantaleo, Justin DeMarco, Sergeant Kizzy Downs, and others for killing Eric Garner, and Wayne Isaac for killing
Yes, look, I've spoken to this so many times, I'll summarize it here, but I respect anybody who has strong views, anyone who's an activist, but I have spoken to this and made it real clear. What happened to Eric Garner was horrible. I know his family. It's a horrible tragedy, and my heart has gone out to them the whole time. The biggest tragedy since then has been that the place we all turn to for an answer, the United States Department of Justice, would not act in any way, shape, or form, and that held up us from acting. We finally decided to move ahead regardless. At this point, we have a trial that is finishing now. There will be a judgment. That will be the end of that matter. So, respectfully, I have spent a lifetime working for fairness and equality. We not only have the safest big city in America, we've done a huge amount to ensure safety for communities of color, fairness for communities of color. That's what I've devoted myself to. The evidence is very clear. I disagree with your analysis, but I can at least tell you this issue will be resolved by what we're doing right now. I don't know when, if ever, the Justice Department will act. Go ahead. I have to ask you, why are they steaming the milk during your question?
I just don't think that's fair.
It's like, we gotta get them into a good job, right? You know, it's like, I come from manufacturing, and we took several years of pay cuts, and I think that we need to protect our trade policies so that we're not taking our good jobs out of this country, that we're bringing some of those jobs back, you know, so that, because these kids today have student loan debt that's just ridiculous, and they're not giving that money back to the economy. You know, what we can actually down to their up, you know, so that they can get it.
So 2 points. Again, my third week in this election, I'm going to have a lot in terms of formal positions coming up, but I can give you the broad strokes. First is a new NAFTA. And I do not see why the Congress should pass a new NAFTA. So let's start with that. Even though Donald Trump tried to change the name, it's still NAFTA. And NAFTA had a horrible impact on manufacturing communities all over America, including here in Iowa. And why do we think the guy who has given away the store to the 1% is about to bring us a better NAFTA? I don't buy it. It's a con job. So I would say to the Democrats in the Congress, there is no reason to pass Donald Trump's new NAFTA. Period. And then, when we start afresh with the Democratic administration, what I would do is a fair trade plan. I would say, unless we can get true labor standards that create equivalency, true environmental standards, why would we sign a trade deal with anyone? I was against the Trans-Pacific Partnership too for the same reason. It was going to be a horrible giveaway to corporate America. By the way, corporate America was going to get to have its own judicial process, basically, under the TPP. And a whole lot of Democrats supported it. Which I think is another reason why American working people look at us sometimes and are like, well, wait a minute, which side are you on? We have to be on the side of working people. So point one, no more con jobs, no new NAFTA, a whole different approach. And point two is all the things that the federal government can do to spark job creation. Because when you think about renewable energy, if we really did everything we had to do on renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal, everything we can do in this country, there's a huge amount of manufacturing that goes with that. And that should be a federal policy. We should be fostering it directly with government support, and we should be ensuring the jobs are where people have lost those manufacturing jobs before, and in places in rural America that have been decimated. And that is doable if there's a federal policy to target those investments. It's totally done. The federal government has immense power to shape the economic outcome, and they've been very good at doing it for the 1%. So any conservative who tells you, I don't want government intervening, government's been intervening for a long time on behalf of the 1%. Anyone who tells you they don't like redistribution, the government, the federal government has been redistributing wealth to the 1% for decades. For decades. So that's how I would bring it back. Let's do it a very different way. Last one.
I am an Iowan. This is my neighborhood. I'm raising my family just a couple blocks away. My husband is a federal employee, and so we were very significantly impacted by the shutdown that started last December 13th and went through the first week of February. It was painful to watch the struggle, to see the lack of civility. Can you speak to reaching across the aisle, working together? I know that you've got bullies across the board that you need to
it was as unjust as it could get. The people who serve us, who work so hard, being left in dangerous limbo. It got so bad that what we were about to do, we announced it publicly, is we were going to find a way to pay the rent for federal workers who were about to be evicted, or make sure that banks did not act on foreclosing on federal workers in our town who were affected by the shutdown. We felt we had to intervene to protect people's housing. And then the notion that all over this country, I mean, people respond with compassion and respect for federal workers, but why should a federal worker ever have to go to a food pantry? That's what was happening. And thank God people reached out that help, but it was just a horrible state in our country. It should never happen again. But to your underlying question, so I've worked with Republicans plenty of times. I don't have a problem doing it. I don't have a problem reaching across the aisle. I actually think some issues, there's grounds for tremendous bipartisanship. I think of mental health. I've talked to, my wife Shalane has talked to a lot of Republican members of the House and Senate who have their own mental health stories about their families. They actually understand something has to change. Opioids is another example where there's been real bipartisanship. I think actually on a lot of the issues of working people, maybe not the elected officials, but there are plenty of Republican voters and independent voters who don't want to see another NAFTA either, don't want to see money continually concentrated in the hands of the few. I actually think there's tremendous grounds for consensus, but here's what I would do differently as a matter of approach, both as candidate and as president. You have to go where people are don't agree with you. And I will say this, I represent a city of 8.6 million highly opinionated people. I've had town hall meetings all over, and anyone comes up and anyone asks what they want to ask. You have to be willing to go where you're popular, where you're not popular, they agree, they disagree, but have the dialogue because that's how respect begins. And I think going into quote-unquote red states and red counties and talking about working people, this is the thing that really could unite us. Talk about what it would look like to have government on the side of working people and respecting people. Because one of the mistakes Democrats have made too often is if you don't go there, it is a sign of disrespect. Maybe it wasn't meant that way, but that's how a lot of people perceive it. You don't even ask for their vote or ask for them to join you on an issue. It's a sign of disrespect, and it shouldn't be that way. So I am actually hopeful. I am actually hopeful that if we start putting it down to issue by issue, by the way, a clear majority of Republicans oppose Citizens United. It's been proven over and over again. A clear majority of Republicans think the 1% are not paying their fair share of taxes. How about we talk to them and bring some of them into our coalition for change? I think it can be done. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
And I would like to thank the Petersons who own this beautiful coffee shop. I hope you're going to get involved tomorrow in all of the different activities that are happening.
That's right.
And thank you again.
Great to see everyone. Thank you.